any wargame, anytime. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Any Wargame, Anytime. And it's myself, Bozz, joined today by Dan, and by Sam, and by our special guest, Jacob, who is a games designer. Hello Jacob, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Yeah, very well, very well. And how are you, Dan and Sam?
Well, I'm doing great. I'm basically envious of Jacob. I want to steal his life and and instantly become a designer, like steal his identity and become a game designer myself. But I'm doing good.
Now, would that also involve some kind of like surgical procedure to resemble him?
Of course.
I think it
I
has.
just thought that was an
I'd be
important
changing him
clarification.
out, right? I'd have to like be, houses and these different people. Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, Jacob, can you tell us a little bit about yourself to aid in Dan's identity theft scheme, please?
Sure thing. So I'm Jacob Hampton. I design tabletop games. Currently, my main project is one called Freelancer, Skies Over Tolindia, which is being published by SafeHaven Games. It's a tabletop role-playing game set in roughly World War I era, only you have airships flying around as well. So that's kind of my main project. The core game actually released last year on April 1st of all days. And now I'm currently working on some expanded content for that. I also have a few other projects I'm working on, but most of them are too early to discuss since this is Any Wargame, Anytime. However, I will say I'm working on a wargame project, kicking that around right now.
Ooh.
Placeholder title is Deep Patrol. Don't have a whole lot to say about it, but I wanted to make an asymmetrical skirmish game. That's kind of my goal, where it's not just two-player. You can have 3, 4, however many people playing at once.
Well, that's intriguing.
Yeah.
So, tell us a bit about what it is you actually do. Like, what is your job, and what are some of the things that you're working on apart from this super secret war game that we totally didn't just hear about?
Well, my job is not super set. I think there's a lot of ideas of what a game designer is versus what it actually is. But I don't really work for a company. I submit things to publishers, and they get hopefully published or not. And I think a lot of people think, oh, I want to be a game designer. You get to play games all day and get a paycheck. First off, I wish I get to play games all day. Second off, I wish I got regular paychecks. So it's a royalty-based gig rather than salaried. So you can make the best game in the world, but if the marketing team isn't up to snuff, or you're just with a small indie publisher, it might take some time before you see anything at all. For example, my RPG actually got delayed in a lot of its marketing because someone flagged, we posted join the Freelancer core, and someone flagged it on social media as us trying to recruit for a militia. So marketing kind of, I got my royalties about 3 months later than I was hoping to get them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fun job. It's a challenging job. It's the things you agonize over that you never would guess you agonize over. The amount of time I've spent racking my brain over exactly how to describe elevation rules for combat. Like, wait, if I word it this way, that means they might not get the advantage in this very specific situation. So how do we work that out? How do we make it so, wait, sure, I'm on higher ground, but you're in a trench. So do I still get my high ground bonuses? What happens there? So it's just a lot of kind of fiddly details, a lot of, I wouldn't say heated arguments, but certainly a lot of verbal debates back and forth with co-designers.
Lively discussions, perhaps.
But yeah, sure. We'll call it lively discussions.
I mean, it's great. It's funny, our last we're trying to make this positive. Our last 2 podcasts have basically just been dunking on regular on different companies and different things. So, but it's fascinating that I wonder, like, it's really interesting that you're struggling with that too, because we as players, I know, really struggle to understand and parse. Like, it's pretty difficult to do.
Oh, yeah.
It's good to hear on the other side.
It's quite difficult, and there's so much time put into probabilities and calculations, trying to figure out all the specific wording, and then in about a month after you release, no matter how much play testing you've done, the public is going to play your game far more than you ever had a chance to. So that's when you get people coming back with like, hey, how does this thing work? And you're like, let me flip through my notes and see if I even know how that thing works.
How often do you find yourself just making up a response on the spot and trying to pass it off as wisdom?
I avoid that pretty strongly because, well, I've been part of a few gaming communities where they've had a dev, there who gives a quick response, and then a day later is like, oh, by the way, that actually isn't how it works. So what I always say is, oh, that's coming in the next version of the FAQ.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
and then frantically turn around and be like, hey, time to make the next version of the FAQ. What do we do in this situation? But yeah, so that's kind of my, there's a little peeking under the hood, if you will. The game dev ever says, it's coming in the next FAQ, it means we have no idea.
I'd always suspected.
The truth is revealed. The dark and dirty secrets of the game design world.
Yep. You heard it here first, folks. Well, to go back a little bit further than that, how did you get into game design? Were you an enthusiastic player who thought, oh, I can have a go at that?
Yeah, more or less. Kind of if I had to pick a single moment that really started it, it was basically by accident back in college. A whole bunch of my friends and I were playing a Mordheim campaign. We really got into Mordheim. And we didn't have enough books to go around. Frankly, I had the book. And one other guy had the book, but he was, let's say, forgetful. It was always at his house and never where we needed to play it. So everyone kept turning to me with questions about the rules, and I got most of them right. And some of the others, I just kind of said what felt right or what I thought was right, and it really wasn't correct at all. So the first design I made was our own version of Mordheim. And after about 2 games, I stopped playing my warband. I actually still have those poor Skaven. They're not even finished painting because I dropped them. And I kind of took over as sort of like a GM, game master for the group. And we made our own personal Mordheim. I threw zombie apocalypses at them. I had dragons doing sweeping fire down the streets. And at the end of it, one of my friends, David, turns to me and says, have you ever considered making your own game? And yeah, I decided I would. So we went to the cafeteria and I banged out a crude game called Headball, the ball game without a ball. Simple stuff. You have a team of clones on a grid. One of them is a giant 2x2 crazy guy with an axe who decapitates anyone who comes near, and then the head becomes the ball. So not very good, frankly. There was no customization. There was no replay value. But still, that's kind of my starting point, and I was hooked. I still have a piece of paper folded up on my desk right now, actually, for that original Headball. So that's my first game ever made. It'll probably never see the light of day outside this conversation and a couple rounds in college. But
what would it take to get you to release some version of that game? Because it sounds amazing.
It does, yeah.
I have considered going back to it and making it kind of fresh, but right now, game design is kind of like it's like an onion, I suppose. You got these different layers. but you have to start in the middle and work your way out. So it's got that middle layer, has the core mechanics down, but it now needs everything that makes it, a good game. If you were playing, like, let's say, Kings of War, and every single unit was identical, it's not very exciting, right? It's like, oh, I have my 20 shield wall humans, you have your 20 shield wall humans. Let's see who gets better on the dice. That's kind of what Head Bowl is right now. So I need to think through, like, hey, what are the different styles of clones you can be? What are the different kind of weird gambits you can pull in the middle of the game?
So I have to ask here, when someone is, do they actually die in the game, or do they just keep on just playing ahead?
You lose players, but at halftime, since they're clones, they get replaced.
Okay,
but
good.
The heads remain. So we actually had someone win the winning point with their own head at one point. Which, that was another thing. You could always have someone just dive their own head through the goal.
Again, this just sounds amazing. I want to play this game.
I know.
This started to sound like a more fun version of Blood Bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like Blood Bowl.
Blood Bowl is pretty fun.
Yes. Similar to, but legally distinct from Games Workshop. Back off. Yes. Back off.
It does not have any eagles or skulls on it. All the skulls stay firmly within the head balls.
It is good. I didn't know you played Blood Bowl. It is good to hear another Blood Bowler here. Yeah, because I think all of us are pretty much Blood Bowl.
4 out of 4. That's rare.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
that is rare.
Go on.
Oh, sorry, just huge Blood Bowl fan. I have like 6 teams sitting in my. Well, I just moved, so sitting in a box right now. But
okay, just quickly, favorite team.
Ooh, Ogres.
Okay,
Ogres. Now, is that the favorite? How about the best team in Blood Bowl?
Oh, favorite. They're terrible. They are horrendous.
What do you rank as the best team in Blood Bowl?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It kind of depends on if you're doing a league or if you're just doing a tournament.
League. Yeah.
In a league, I'm gonna say Orcs are pretty solid.
Yep.
I really like Orcs. I think Lizardmen also stand a fair shot if you can protect your skinks.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I mean, if the league, it's a long league, Chaos will eventually snowball into the most murderous fiends to ever step on a pitch. I know my wife plays Blood Bowl as well, and she plays Chaos. And the amount of claw, dirty player, pile-on shenanigans I've faced are unkind to remember.
Yeah, you seem to know your Blood Bowl. Yeah. I definitely think you're right. Works are, to me, it's the best overall team. Yeah, I agree with that one. Great. Yeah.
Well, that kind of leads on quite nicely to the next question. What's your personal favorite game of all time ever?
Well, I talked earlier about Mordheim. That's on the list. I also like Monster Apocalypse. That one's on the list. But honestly, I think my favorite game is Blood Bowl. Specifically Living Rulebook 6. I'm going to be a bit of a grognard here. I don't, it's not a perfect game. It's not a perfect game. But there are very few games that do such an excellent job capturing the feel of what they're meant to. I mean, I've had my vampire trip over their own feet in the end zone and die 2 games in a row. I've seen my wife's Beastmen somehow make a throw they were never meant to make and win the scoring touchdown, Or I play Lizardmen, my Croxagore failed 7 out of 8 bonehead checks in one half. I lost that game, as you might imagine.
No.
But that's what Blood Bowl promises to be, and that's what it is. again, I'm not going to argue it's the best game ever made, but it feels like Blood Bowl.
I'll
And that's
argue it. I'll definitely argue it. Yeah, I think it's the best game. Yeah, I'll argue that point. It's the best game ever made. There's a mechanic in it. The turning over, the understanding is a mechanic I have never seen in other games. It finds a perfect balance between you have to be truly good at Blood Bowl. It stresses you tactfully, but the flavor and the teams are just so good. No, I will argue it's certainly the best game that GW has made. I will put it as one of the best war games. Yeah, I will argue that. Yeah.
I will not, but that's okay. We can have different opinions.
I'm stoked to hear you say that, Dan. I'm going to have to get my teams out of that box sooner than I thought. See you on the pitch.
Yeah.
I think you're right in that what Blood Bowl does so well, certainly better than any kind of game that's supposed to emulate a sport or a race or anything like that. It really does capture the madness of what if a bunch of these stupid fantasy monsters were playing American football?
Yeah. And they kind of understood the rules.
Yeah, it's like they nailed it. They absolutely nailed it.
Did you guys ever play with the cards? See, I think I played in the 90s with the Dead Zone expansion. Have y'all ever played with the cards? I have to ask.
I think I've only ever played with the dice tables personally.
Okay. The cards, like the fact that they have trampoline traps where you can that literally throw someone up in the air, like those cards were, I'm serious. It was crazy, incredibly fun to play with cards. Just all sorts of things. Exploding player, when you block a player, they're just dynamite and they explode. Oh yeah. Okay, I'll stop. I apologize, Jacob. Please forgive me.
Those down.
So, as a games developer, what's an aspect of Blood Bowl that you would change or improve?
Other than going back before the reboots,
pretend you're stuck with the reboot for now.
Oh, okay. That's kind of tough to say. It's difficult to predict madness, the madness on the pitch. That's kind of the point. If I had to pick something, I think I might adjust star player points a little bit. In particular, I'm thinking of MVP being random in the rules, where at the end of the game, one of your players gets MVP randomly, and that's 5 star player points, which is a tremendous amount. So it's like I can have an Orc Blitzer that did 3 casualties and got 2 touchdowns, but my MVP is my bench warming line Orc I brought in case I lost a player. It's like, yeah, that guy did a great job. He brought the water for the team, and he really did it well. And that just that doesn't feel right. I feel like MVP. If you were playing with people who are good sports, I think the best way to do MVP would be you pick your opponent's MVP. You pick. That guy was my biggest nightmare. The problem with that is if you're playing with someone who's a poor sport, you're going to get it on your bench warming line Orc again. And then, I think I'd also change team value a little bit. So team value, we've all played Blood Bowl, it goes up as you get skills or stat increases. But when you take an injury, it doesn't go down. So if you get a guy who loses a point of strength, it's pretty much always worth just cutting him and buying a new player because he's inflating your team value. And I kind of feel like if it decreased your value whenever you got a stat debuff, I think that'd go a long way towards balancing it a little bit better, making it so you keep more of a story with your team.
Yeah, that's right.
That's probably what I'd change. I can't think of anything in the core rules. I love the block dice. I love the turnover system. I love tackle zones. I think everything else I'd keep the same.
Okay, well, tell us a bit about balancing a game. You kind of touched on balance there. So it's got to be a nightmare for game designers, and no one gets it completely right ever. But tell us what you think about balancing a game and how you go about doing it.
Oh, balance. Oh, balance. My old frenemy.
Yes.
Oh yes. It's it's probably one of the most difficult things to get right. And it's probably one of the most difficult things to get across. But I think one of the problems is that most people don't actually know what balance is. And I know that's an inflammatory statement, so I'll explain. Um, and balance, I should say before I get into this, balance works differently in a war game than it does in an RPG. I'm only a published RPG dev, so if you want to throw this out the window, feel free. But here's my take. You go to any gaming community, anywhere, someone's complaining about balance. Like literally, take your pick of any gaming community. Someone says, hey, this is not balanced. And then you always have someone getting right back up and saying, no, it's perfectly fine. And this is often when you see a lot of vitriol and kind of, people get banned from Facebook groups over these arguments. But that just kind of shows balance is important. But I guess what is balance? And, I think of that classic metaphor of the blind men feeling different parts of an elephant. If you've ever heard it. So like there's three blind men and they're feeling different parts of an elephant. One's feeling the legs. So an elephant is this big, round, sturdy thing. And another feels the trunk and says, no, it's long like a snake. And another feels the tail and it's, no, it's this little thin, wispy thing. And they're all right and they're all wrong. Well, there's three forms of balance that you have to consider. And the two probably everyone knows are internal and external balance. But the third one's perceived balance. So I'll go through them all here real quick. Internal, external, pretty much everyone knows these concepts. Internal balance, though, just to explain it, is when you look at a specific faction, are all your options worth taking? If I have a 100-point hero and a 150-point hero, 150-point hero should be better than the 100-point hero, but not so much better that I never want to take the 100-point hero. So are all my options good? That's internal balance. Or at least do all my options have value of some kind? Maybe I look at Nurglings and I'm like, these guys aren't very good, but they have value because they're a pest. And I can use them as a pest, and therefore they're good at this role. External balance is how your faction compares to other factions. Are you able to stand toe-to-toe with them, or do you just fall short, or are you just leagues above? Since I'm bringing this up, anyone who's even remotely aware of 10th edition 40K, I have to call it Eldari here. They have like a 70%.
We have touched on that very briefly, yes.
Yeah. I just actually, a couple days before today, I saw there was results from an event in North Carolina, I want to say, where they shared the top 6 spots, and it's literally just Eldari, 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 all the way down. Every single top spot. So obviously that's external balance that needs addressing, and I know Games Workshop said that.
Right.
Sorry, what was that?
I'm saying it won't be addressed. No,
it won't be addressed. They say it'll be addressed in September, so we'll see by the time this podcast airs. But it needs to be fixed. And well, I've played Games Workshop long enough. I'm not very optimistic about that either. So that's external balance. The last type's perceived. And perceived balance is the hardest because the first two can more or less be solved with math. Obviously not perfect, but that's oversimplifying it. But a good understanding of probabilities and calculating averages, you can do internal and external balance pretty well. Perceived balance is a lot trickier, though, because that is what two players feels fair. So an early example is in D&D, when they were first making Dungeons & Dragons, when people had a 50% chance of success, perfectly even, perfectly fair, they reported feeling like they failed more often than they succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they raised the success rate to about 70%, you succeed and 30% you fail, people started saying, yeah, this feels fair. This feels balanced. This feels even.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's objectively not, right? It's clearly skewed towards the players. Well, in an RPG, it's kind of tricky already, but in a war game, it's extremely tricky because with a dozen or more factions, how do you determine what rate of success is fair? And part of that can be like evening out odds. So people often feel better about more weak attacks than they do a few strong attacks. Because if your big strong attack misses, it feels really horrible. Yeah. Whereas if you attack 10 times, oh, I hit 5 times and I do, wound with 3 of those, people feel like, okay, cool. That seems right. But the one big thing that's very swingy either feels unfair when you miss or unfair to the poor opponent who gets hit by a massive blow. So it's really, really tricky. I could go more into balance, but it's harder to talk about unless I'm talking about something specific at this point. But that's kind of the general overview. That's I guess my general overview of balance.
Okay. Yeah, cool. It's fascinating when you talk about balance in a war game. And this is, correct me if I'm wrong. So in a co-op game, skewing the balance to the players one side is probably not bad. But
no.
In a war game, just like you're talking about, like 2 people can go into the same game, and it's in you're talking about, suppose it's perfectly balanced. What you're saying here, 2 people go into a perfectly balanced game, both of them feel like it isn't balanced enough effectively, right?
Yeah.
If theoretically we did have this perfect game, what you're really saying is most people would feel it's, oh, this game, my army's against me, basically, right? It's underpowered.
Yes and no. In a war game, there's other things you can attribute it to. So potentially, you'd see people being like, oh, my opponent was really good, or oh, those things they have are really strong, but these things I have are strong. Because you're only going to get that experience you're talking about if you're using the same unit for the whole thing. Whereas a lot of people will get the idea that, like, oh, like to call back a really old example, in 7th edition Warhammer Fantasy, our local Dark Elf player was convinced Corsairs were garbage. Corsairs are fantastic. Each of them throwing out 2 attacks with armor piercing, high skill. They did a great job. But he was convinced they were trash because they kept getting put up against targets they didn't really stand a chance against. So like, oh, they really don't work well against those, I can't remember their name, the giant armored ogres. It's like, well, yeah, they don't work well against the giant armored ogres because they're too strong, they're too tough. Okay, you killed one ogre and then they smash you to pieces, yeah. But if you put them against, another smaller, lighter infantry unit, they'll blend them. So that kind of also goes into perceived balance, where someone might say, oh, this unit they're not good enough. Well, it's like, oh. And this is why, another reason why perceived balance is so hard to get right. Because you can have someone be like, oh, this isn't working. And it's like, well, no, it is. You're just only looking at one side. Like that elephant example I mentioned. I can actually come up with an example from my own game. We had a guy who exclusively was doing melee characters. And this is a setting with cannons and rifles. And he's like, I'm going to be a swordsman. Like, okay, great, you be a swordsman. And he kept saying, I'm too weak. I have to spend all this time getting into combat, and I'm not able to compete. I'm not as strong as the other characters. What he didn't notice is that when he got into melee range, he dealt more damage than the entire rest of the party combined. Because his poor enemies were not ready for someone to bring a sword to a gunfight, so he just becomes a blender. So what he suggested was, oh, you need to increase my movement speed. You need to increase my movement speed so I could get there faster. Well, that would have made it so guns were useless. So he's feeling the legs of the elephant, saying these need to be slimmer. And you're like, well, that would collapse the whole elephant. Couldn't hold itself up. No, we still figured something out from that. So what we figured out from that is that it wasn't that he needed to be faster, it was that he needed more options before he reached melee. So now he can hunker down behind cover to be harder to hit. He can raise his shield to raise his armor. He can taunt enemies into stepping out of position. He can intimidate them into making them less effective. And that's just what he can do as a starting character now. So as you can see, we were able to fix it. And once he got used to that, he no longer felt like there was an issue. But when he's talking about balance, he's like, this needs to change. I'm too slow. And it's like, no, you're not too slow. If you were any faster, you would be the only viable character.
Yeah. Guy brings the sword to a gunfight and then complains about all the guns. Sorry, Sam.
I think this brings in a context of wargaming, though, this brings up a really interesting issue, which is the issue of kind of a competitive meta. And because you can, I think a lot of times, and correct me if I'm wrong, from a game design perspective, you can look at things that are, okay, this is internally and externally balanced. But once you actually put it into practice and people start playing it in mass, you get this development of a meta, right? Of a, certain things are predominant in the meta right now. So like you kind of have it creates an additional, I think, impediment to that, to trying to balance things. And I'm curious, like, do you have any I'm curious if you have any insights you'd like to share about that, or because one of the things I've kind of seen recently, and I'll use Kings of War as an example because that's the game I'm the most familiar with. So one of the issues that we're kind of seeing right now is there's no real consistency in terms of how tournaments are organized across different events, in terms of things like the amount of terrain, the type of terrain, and one of the things this does, as well as the types of scenarios you play. One of the things this does is there's certain tournaments here, like in our South region, that you just can't bring a shooting list to, because the tournament organizers or whatever really doesn't like shooting lists. So there's always going to be a couple scenarios that are going to just be really bad for shooting lists, and the terrain's going to be huge and blocking and covering most of the board.
Right.
So how do you kind of how would you kind of go about balancing a game within that kind of context of there being kind of a competitive meta?
So that's a great question. That's a really good question, because what you're also talking about is local metas. And local metas, like especially if tournament organizers start changing things, frankly, there's nothing you can do. Unless you have a clear, this is how competitive play is meant to be. If you have a clear, like when we're doing competitive play, you have, I don't know, D6 plus 2 terrain pieces. I just came up with that off the top of my head. I have no idea where that came from, so I'm not advocating that for anything, just so you know. But let's say that's what it is. It's like, okay, we have D6 plus 2 terrain pieces. Everyone knows there's going to be D6 plus 2 terrain pieces. Cool, 3 to 8 pieces of terrain. That's really varied. They don't really know what they're going to do, but that means you have to build for all kinds of different situations. Or maybe you have a pack that says, we have 6 terrain pieces. It's always set up perfectly mirrored. That's how we're going to do it. And in this case, Mantic Games, makers of Kings of War, would have to say, okay, this is how you do a tournament for Kings of War. Then you could see an actual more of an effort to control the balance of that meta. But once tournament organizers start coming in and being like, oh, I don't like shooting, for example, so I'm going to make more terrain or more blocking terrain or whatever you have, it's kind of impossible for the game company to keep up with that, because now the tournament organizer is making changes the game devs never intended. And also, I just have to say, because this is one of my pet peeves, why do archers never arc their fire in war games?
I don't know.
Why do you need line of sight?
Or at the very least, why do you? I mean, it would be interesting because you could then distinguish between things like archers and rifles or slingers,
right?
Because yes. I mean that was why slings are a great weapon, but they fell out of disuse because you can't fire them, you can't arc them and fire them in formation.
Exactly. So sorry, that was a little aside.
To address that pet peeve, have you played the Middle Earth, a strategy battle game?
I've only played like the very start of the skirmish. I haven't played the full.
So way back when it was the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring strategy battle game, back in the early 2000s. I don't know if it's carried over to now, but yeah, the archers could. They didn't need line of sight.
Fantastic.
They took a hit to accuracy, but you could
Makes sense.
You could attempt to fire over your folk into other folk.
There's one thing I think I've gotten out of this that's kind of hitting home to me is the psychological side of balance. That to me, it's I knew about internal balance, knew about external, but it's really fascinating that you're right. It's kind of like its balance is probably similar to kind of like economics, where all these models sound great, but there is a part of economics called behavioral economics that basically says, wait, all these models in which you are basing that these humans are rational, you have to have this caveat and you have to have this other layer on top of it. And so I appreciate that, because that's really got me thinking about, you're right.
You mean humans aren't just completely rational actors all the time?
And don't have mathematical and do not have mathematical precision. I think that's an interesting idea.
Yeah. So, I've always said, if someone designed the perfectly balanced game, someone would be there still saying, this thing is not balanced right. This unit's not proper, because it's that perceived balance that you also have to wonder about.
That's why it's so nice that there are so many games to choose from, because no one game is ever going to please every player. And wouldn't it be boring if it did?
Yeah. I mean, it would absolutely just, if everyone played the same game in only one game, that'd be a disaster for gaming communities. As I look at my old gaming community that only played 40K.
Yeah. I have a local club. They play lots of 40K, but there's also a BloodBowl league there. There's also the Star Wars war game, whose full name escapes me at this moment. I play a lot of Necromunda there. There's one-page rules there. Like it's a varied club, and they play a variety of games. 40K is predominant, as it usually is, but it's not the be all and end all. This is the Whitehaven Wargaming Club in Whitehaven, Cumbria, UK.
Yeah. Nice.
All right.
And so we're talking about balancing and how challenging that is. So what are some of the other challenging issues of game design?
Probably the kind of big one is playtesting. Playtesting is definitely a big challenge, because a lot of people think playtesting is you play the game and then you talk about it afterwards. It's like, no, that's what you do when you're playing it, for fun. That's where Sam steamrolls my dwarves and afterwards tells me, you shouldn't have done that. If you had done this, you would have won. And I'm like, yeah, I should have done that. But yes, I still remember those honor guards, Sam. I still remember them.
This is probably back in late second edition too, when On Regard were really really good. Yeah,
Yeah, it was. I think it was that final tournament we did where it was the last game of second edition we all played.
I
I think it was
I,
that.
I have vague memories of this, but boy,
Well,
you go back that far, and my head starts to fail me.
well. Anyways, I digress. If so, I'll say this actually about game design. If you just want to play games, just play games. Because being a game designer has reduced my game time, and when I do play these play tests, it's very different. It's like a dissection in the early stages where in the middle of a round of combat where you're like, hey, hold up. Okay. Tim, run the odds of that. What was the chances of that roll? Tim is a playtester of mine. He teaches physics in California. So instead of having a calculator, I have a Tim. It's like, what are the odds on that? And he's like, oh, that was like 4.2%. Okay, so that was kind of a weird outlier. Hey, is this feeling overpowered? Hey, Kenny, how's the heavy armor penalty? Is that too much? Let's tone down the mortar. Hey, we're going to drop its destroyer rating by 1 right now and keep going. And you do that constantly the entire time you're playing and annoy your poor playtesters who you drag along. And that's the early stage. And then the middle stage is a lot more fun because that's when you're just kind of making sure everything runs smoothly. And that's when you actually kind of get to play the game. And then every once in a while, pump the brakes and be like, hey, I don't like the way parry's working. What do you guys think about the way the parry system works? God forbid you have to adjust a core mechanic at that point, or you have to restart from the beginning. He says from experience. And then the final stages are absolutely nerve-wracking because the final stage of playtesting is I don't get to play anymore. I hand the rules to someone else and say, you read it, you figure out how it works. I'm going to sit here and either be the happiest man on the planet or be dying inside as you play this game that I'm hoping you play right. For example, in this stage, we, as a beta, let a live stream play my RPG. And I was dying inside the entire time because they got this so one of the core mechanics is called heroic actions. And for a player character, it's tied to your resolve stat. But long story short, when your health hits 0, which can happen pretty quick when a bullet hits you, you can spend a heroic action to regain all your health and take on a heroic injury. So it can be something like, it's in the movies where you get shot in the leg and now you can't move as fast, or you get shot in the shoulder and now you can, your left arm's not as effective. Well, they thought that anything with the resolve stat had that many heroic actions. So they're throwing this little basic enemy that's meant to be a horde you just kind of chew your way through, but they're also like crazy cultists. So they have high resolve. They're not going to be persuaded. Well, when they have that many heroic actions, it's like this basic little cultist is suddenly Bruce Willis, through the leg, shot through this, has a gaping head wound, chest, shot through the lung, and he's like, I'm not giving up. It's like, what is this? Cultist number 3. How did you get this powerful?
I mean, it sounds fun.
Well, it's fun in one sense, but it kind of made this combat a slog.
Last forever. Yeah.
You're supposed to drop these 3 cultists, go in the next room. There's a dragon worshiping cult. They have a dragon. You're like, oh crap, there's a dragon. Well, instead, by the time they got there, they've all been shot several times by the cultists. They're like, there's a dragon too? So it was there I am sitting this stream just like this, my hands over my the entire time, trying not to scream. And then I've also had playtests where I've given the rules to someone else and watched them run it and been like, that was fantastic. Oh my goodness, everything went perfectly. Thank you for reading how monsters work. But yeah. So playtesting is definitely another big challenge. How you use playtesting is a big challenge because, like I gave with that other example with Melee, pretty much every time a playtester says this is an issue, you're like, fantastic, that's an issue. Thank you for pointing that out. And then they say, and this is how to fix it. You say, thank you very much. I won't be doing it. Because that elephant in the room, they're feeling the trunk. And they're like, this is how you fix the trunk. You're like,
Yeah.
No, the elephant needs that trunk. Let's look at other options.
Well, that's
sorry. No, I'm done. You go.
I was just going to say that's another very good segue into the next question, which is how do you incorporate user feedback into your game? You've kind of touched on that. Can you go a bit deeper for us?
Sure. So, it is a mixed bag feedback. Especially we did a lot of our early playtesting actually at conventions. So we were actually at San Diego Comic-Con, of all places, and they have a game room. We set up and we had a bunch of people coming throughout the day to play our game. And we had someone say all kinds of feedback. We had all kinds of feedback from that event. And a lot of it, you can use the feedback every time, just not in the way the person giving it thinks you should use it. Whenever a playtester, barring there are a few people, of course, who are like, I don't know, let's say you play dwarves in wargaming, and they're like, dwarves are underpowered. We need +3 strength on all of our weapons. It's like, yeah, okay, that guy just wants dwarves to win every game.
Yeah.
That guy's me, by the way. But no, it's like, okay, aside from those guys who just want their team to be on top, playtesters are trying to give you good feedback. They are trying. And whenever they give feedback, they are pointing out something you've missed. They just don't always know how to fix it. That's your job as a game dev. You are there to fix the issues. So when my friend Kenny complained that he wasn't moving fast enough, that Melee was underpowered, he was right in that Melee characters had an issue. The real problem was that he didn't have enough to do before he reached Melee. So he was having these boring turns of, I moved twice, and that's not fun. But I move once, I raise my shield, and I shout at that guy to put down his weapon, or he does not want to know what I'm going to do to him. That's a much more exciting turn. He's more engaged. He's able to act more. So when he tried to say this is what needs to happen, he didn't quite have it right. But when he said this is an issue, he was 100% correct. And that's really the way you incorporate feedback. And especially when you have the larger your playtesting group, the better. And if you have, let's say, 100 playtesters, and one person mentions, hey, rifles are too short range. Well, you have to look how many people used rifles that day. Oh, if 80 of them used rifles and only one person is saying the range is too short, you can probably discount that. But if, a dozen people point out this doesn't feel right or this isn't working, the more people say it, obviously, the more obviously you have an issue. But even that one person saying rifles are too short range, if you go back and look at their game, look at how they play, which you're taking notes the entire time, hopefully you can do that. Sometimes we even record people playing the game. We can be like, oh, okay, what they're actually experiencing is this issue where they felt like they couldn't target the enemy enough. They felt like they never had options. How do we fix that issue? So yeah, it's difficult to incorporate user feedback. But
it's really good. If anything out of this podcast, I don't want to be a game designer now. I think I don't know if that was your intention, but I do not.
You've quite successfully talked him out of stealing your identity. Well done.
Yeah, you have.
I like this space.
Well, maybe we can turn it around though. What's your favorite aspect of game design? What's going to draw Dan back into his evil plan to steal your life?
my favorite aspect, if I had to pick one, it's just so April 1st last year, I released my game into the wild. People could start playing it. And we have a Discord. There's a freelancer Discord that you can join, and you'll see people talking about it. And there's something just totally mind-blowing. People are there posting stories about playing your game, and that is one of the greatest things. For example, just on our Discord, I guess that was last week, this group is on there being like, "Oh, I can't believe what a bloody mess you made on that train," and I have no idea what happened on that train. But here's a group of strangers on the East Coast of the United States playing my game. I've never met them, but it's amazing. Like, they're sharing these stories in this world I've created, in the system I've created. And that is extremely rewarding. I will say it's a lot of hard work, but the payoff is immense. It's just, there's nothing quite like it. I mean, a lot of game designers compare the game design cycle to raising a child. When you just have a concept, you have your little infant, and then you add more systems and refine it. It's aging and aging, and then you let it go off and do its own thing. Well, when you see it succeeding out there in the wild, apart from you, there's nothing like it. So I'd say that's my favorite thing. Total strangers playing my game, sharing stories, talking about the memories they now have at the table because of something I made.
Coming after Jake's face again.
No.
And before, we do not want to, and we're going to post all your links in the description, but if they don't check it, can you just tell us, so that they're listening, really quickly, that they can find this on the internet?
Sure. So the company that is publishing my game is called SafeHaven Games. If you want to go to their website, it is just www.safehaven-games.com, and you'll find Freelancers, guys over Tolindia there. There's also just freelancersrpg.com, which will have some links, including, if you sign up to the newsletter, there's actually some free STLs for those of you who do 3D printing.
Oh, no.
And then on either of those websites, there should be a link to our Discord, which I'm on the Discord every day. My username is Redhammer. You'll see me responding in all kinds of goofy ways. And when you join my Discord, I will give you a gecko sticker.
You did. I joined, and you did give me a gecko sticker.
The gecko sticker. It's very important.
I can confirm the man is telling the truth.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Gecko stickers are very important.
Well,
yeah, we will be posting all these links in the description.
Absolutely. And before we do go, Jacob, you're a game developer. You've got 3 gamers here. Is there anything that you wanted to ask us? Anything at all that springs to mind?
That's a great question. I suppose if I could ask any one thing, what is an element you wish was in a game that you've never seen? Like a mechanic or a system or an option you can take. If there's one thing that you've not seen in a game that you wish was there, what would that be?
Well, I'll go first, and I think the first thing, and it's probably because we were talking about BloodBowl, I haven't seen that sort of chance. Like, I haven't seen it really replicated in other sorts of games where you're this push your luck sort of chance thing that really forces you to organize your moves and think deeply and that sort of thing. I would like to see that sort of mechanic in other games other than BloodBowl. So yeah, that'll be me.
Okay.
So I would like to see something better emulate, in terms of wargaming, especially better emulate a general giving orders and having people then go off and follow those orders. And in the sense that there's kind of this delay almost between here's the plan and here's the follow through on the plan. And it's I wouldn't say it's something that no one has ever done. I'm reminded of how Mage Knight did its activation system, in terms of like you could showing my age here talking about Mage Knight, but where you would have kind of a limited number of activations. I would like to see that brought back to wargaming, where you have kind of I think what that kind of emulates is, again, you have a kind of a command structure within your army, and this unit's going to go off and do this thing, and they're commanded by this person, and there's at some point there's this kind of delay between the general relaying orders and the the sergeant in the field commanding the formation. That's a lot there, but that's something I would like to see in a war game.
That's actually a very interesting idea. Like, so kind of like a standing order that you start with, and they do that until you tell them otherwise. But maybe you have to send a messenger there to get that new order going. Yeah,
I think that has some potential, and then you could even in terms of a war game, well, maybe that messenger is going to get intercepted, and maybe there's going to be some kind of a what I'm really wanting to emulate is the fog of war in a wargaming, which is something that I feel like doesn't get expressed enough in terms of wargaming. It's the fog of war, because I'm a nerdy history guy, so
bring Mage Knight back.
Yes, that kind of touches on my thing. I'd really like to see a proper kind of solo game that's basically like Splinter Cell or Metal Gear Solid in wargame style. I'm not necessarily there to kill the other team. I'm there to achieve my objective or stealth out the other side, and have the rules for doing that stealth not be clunky, and having it not just be, oh, someone saw you, now the whole board is against me. Some sort of escalating thing for if I get caught and I don't take the guy out fast enough, or if I achieve my objective but don't escape. I'd love to see a good stealth war game, or a good stealth mechanic incorporated into a war game that I could use.
I will say I've attempted to make a stealth sci-fi game a few times, and it's one of those that I keep going back to the drawing board because I'm never quite satisfied with how the stealth turns out. It's very tricky, but
yeah, I imagine it would be.
I would love to see it. I would love to see it work. Yeah, interesting.
Yes.
Well, now I don't know how I'm going to combine these three ideas into one game.
No. We want a game each. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I will retract
games coming right
and
up.
I will ask for headball. Just give me headball.
Just give me headball. Just give me headball. It'll be fine.
Maybe I will get back to the drawing board.
You absolutely should.
You had three people here tell you that this sounds like a great idea. So
yep. If you'd like Jacob to release headball, put it in the comments below so we can pressure him into doing it. There's a market for this, I assure you.
All right, I'll try to bring it to our local club next month here. So
yeah.
If I'm doing it, you guys have to agree to play test it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll do it.
We'll have to do it remotely. I'm a little far away.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, Jacob, for coming on and letting us pick your brain and giving us all these wonderful insights. You've let us know where to find you, and yeah, it's been a real pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, stay tuned for the next episode coming out soon. Any war game, anytime.